Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from a photographer's point of view. Round 17, the Singapore Grand Prix. Sergio Perez won the Singapore Grand Prix by executing the perfect start. He overtook Charles Leclerc to lead at the first corner. It sounds simple, but this was actually a perfectly executed race weekend from the Mexican. This in the context of the mounting pressure that had been on him. So many pundits and commentators have been questioning whether he was the right man for Red Bull. He's had a bit of a dip in form recently, and that brought the knives out. It was important that Perez showed everyone that he deserved to be in this car, and that he was capable of winning races. His qualifying lap was enormous, but didn't really get the credit it deserved. Most of the talk in the paddock was about how close Lewis was in third place, or how Charles was going to win from pole, or when it was about Red Bull, it was about how the team messed up in fueling Max's car. Perez was able to sneak under the radar. He's becoming a bit of a street circuit specialist. He got that pole position in Saudi Arabia, which is a very challenging track. He won in Monaco, which is another technical circuit. Most photographers had taken up a position directly in front of the winning cars. Hardly anyone had gone to the side. So I went off there, and I was joined by Perez's entire team. This put me in the perfect position to photograph the driver's celebration. This photograph of Perez celebrating with his trainer, Joe Canales. I love this shot as it shows so much emotion, the payoff for such hard work and dedication. The podium celebration was another emotional affair, with an awful lot of champagne being sprayed. Perez's joy was in such strong contrast to Charles Leclerc. This is yet another race that he could have won that he's let slip through his fingers. Leclerc will have been happy to have outscored Max, but gutted to have missed out on another win. There are shades of the last Singapore Grand Prix in 2019, where Charles Leclerc was on pole position, but he lost out to his teammate Sebastian Vettel in a pit stop mix-up at Ferrari. It's so sad seeing him again distraught in second place. Here's a shot of Charles at the start of the drivers' parade. You can see the clouds in the background building up for what was going to be a torrential downpour. While photographing the race in Singapore is a considerable challenge, it's very hot and exceptionally humid. Apparently the drivers have it even worse than us photographers. I heard that Lando Norris usually is about 73 kgs. He will bulk up predominantly on fluids before the start of the race, bringing him to about 75. By the end of it, he'll have been down to 71. They lose an incredible amount of weight through perspiration and just physical exhaustion in that heat and in that humidity. I didn't weigh myself before or after the race, so I'm not too sure what the effect was on photographers, but I can tell you it was very hot. The race weekend starts on Thursday. There are quite a few media events that happen at this time. One of the strangest ones I came across was Yuki Tsunoda being fed sushi by Pierre Gasly. Yuki was supposed to guess the flavour of each roll. However, they were not made of traditional sushi ingredients. Chocolate, for example, was included. Judging by Yuki's reactions, these were not successful substitutions. Halfway through filming, Daniel Ricciardo came past and joined in the Let's Feed Yuki Unpleasant Things competition. It was confirmed before the start of the race that Yuki Tsunoda would be racing for AlphaTauri in 2023. That'll be his third season with the Italian team. Along with the sushi tasting, there was also a fitness challenge by Red Bull for footballers Micah Richards, Jamie Redknapp, and comedian Alan Carr. Sergio Perez and his trainer Joe Canales put these three through their paces. This included doing strength exercises, such as this one, which improves the strength of your neck. They also tested their reaction times to try and judge which of the three would make the best Formula One driver. On Thursdays, a lot of the drivers also do a track walk. This gives them an opportunity to have a close look of the track, see where there are bumps, look what the curbs are like, and see if there have been any changes since the last time they were there. It took me just over an hour to walk the 5-kilometre track. Here is a shot of Pierre Gasly walking with his team. Some of the drivers chose to cycle rather than walk. Here's a photograph of Valtteri Bottas and his partner Tiffany Cromwell cycling the track. He cycled straight at me and then swerved at the last minute, which allowed me to get this quite cool shot. Tiffany's a professional cyclist. She competed in the Olympics for Australia, and she's won stages at all the women's Grand Tours. On Friday, for free practice, I split the first session between being in the pits and going into the Singapore Flyer, which is a grand, giant Ferris wheel just next to the track. From here, I was able to get brilliant views of the city. In this shot, you can see how the yellow lights of the track weave its way through the city. This shot of the final corner shows how close we are to the water's edge. You get a good view of the main straight, and I was able to shoot this long shutter speed shot of Mick Schumacher at a 20th of a second. Talking of Mick, it looks increasingly like he won't be in Formula One next year, unless he can take that second seat at Williams. We discovered before the race that Williams and Nicholas Latifi will be parting company. It was Fernando Alonso's 350th race, making him the driver with the most race starts of all time. He has such hunger and passion for the sport. It wouldn't surprise me if he does 400 races. All the drivers lined up to celebrate this amazing achievement. One of the cool things about photographing any street circuit is you often get a chance to photograph some very cool architectural elements and include those in your image. It's tricky with Singapore at night because the track is very bright and the buildings are quite dark in the background, and it's very difficult to expose your photograph correctly for both of those elements. Here is a shot of Charles Leclerc in front of the National Gallery. Even though the building is fairly well lit, it is so much darker than the track. It's very difficult to get any detail in that darkness. Here is a shot of Alex Albon coming past the Fullerton Hotel. There appears to be smoke coming out of his car. This is probably the result of a lockup as he came out of the Anderson Bridge. It was actually incredible seeing Alex race this weekend. If you remember, he missed the last race in Monza due to appendicitis. It was actually quite a complex operation and he had to go on a ventilator. So to see him back racing probably the toughest race of the season straight off that operation is quite incredible. In photography, you always have this balance between how fast your shutter speed is, how much of your photograph is in focus, and what is the quality, how much grain do you have. In daylight, with modern cameras, that balance isn't too difficult to achieve. But as things get darker at night, it really becomes a challenge. You have to compromise on one or two of those. If you want a crisp image, you have to have a fairly high shutter speed, which means you either need to compromise on your depth of field or have a high ISO, which increases grain. If your depth of field is too small, and you're photographing a fast-moving subject like a racing car, it's very possible that your subject has moved out of focus in the time it's taken you to take the shot. I tend to compromise on ISO. I would prefer a shot that's slightly more grainy than one that's out of focus or unintentionally blurred. There's a lot you can do to reduce the effects of grain in the edit. Another way to achieve that balance is to drop your shutter speed and go for an intentionally blurred, slow shutter speed shot. In this shot of Pierre Gasly, I've dropped my shutter speed to about 1/10 of a second. I love taking slow shutter speed shots of cars turning in corners. You get an area of quite definite focus, and then it blurs towards the extremities. Dropping even lower to 1/3 gives you a dramatic dust scene like this shot of Lando Norris. The car is mostly recognizable, but I'm getting some wonderful colors in the sky, and blurriness gives it a magical quality. This is a side shot of Lando Norris going through the final corner. Blurring the advertising boards gives this image a lot of strong lines and helps you focus on the car. McLaren ran a special livery for this race in Japan. This is in partnership with one of their sponsors, OKX, who are a cryptocurrency exchange. The press release reads, "The special livery enhances McLaren's Flora Papaya colorway with a neon pink embellishment and dynamic cyberpunk-inspired engine illustrations. The effervescent design represents the emergence of new technologies." What do you think of this livery? For me, I think McLaren have found a way to make a bad livery even worse. McLaren are parting ways with Australian driver Daniel Ricciardo at the end of the year. Daniel is currently without a drive for next year, and it looks like he only has options at Williams or Haas remaining available. He did have his best drive of the season in Singapore, coming from low down the grid to take a 5th place thanks to a very good race strategy as well as very well-timed safety cars. Has he left it too late to remind everyone of his true potential? He's ruled out racing in another series next year, so his only other option available is taking a reserve driver role at one of the bigger teams like Mercedes or Ferrari. That's very risky, and there's not a guaranteed way back onto the grid if he does this. The night race in Singapore is a great opportunity to shoot spark photographs. The current generation of Formula One cars don't spark as much as their predecessors, but it's still quite impressive. Here are a series of shots I've taken around turns 6 and 7 during the race. First of all, we have Sergio Perez leading from the front. This is a head-on shot showing a lot of sparks coming out of the back of the car. The next one is Lando, Lewis and Max. Lewis hit the wall on the previous lap, and part of his bodywork was scraping along the ground. Next is a rear shot of Perez. This was taken just before the safety cars came out for Yuki Tsunoda. And the final one is of Max trying to overtake Lando after the restart. He overdid it here, failed to brake for the corner, and had to dive into the escape road at turn 7. This was the first weekend that Max was mathematically able to win the title. There was a lot of media attention surrounding the Dutchman all weekend. Max has been completely dominant this season. He had a few engine troubles at the start of the year, but since then he's been unstoppable. So this was the first race, as far as I can recall, that he's actually made mistakes that he wasn't able to recover from. He's had a few spins in some of the other races, but he was able to win those. The engine issues in Bahrain and Australia, plus the debris that he picked up in Silverstone, dropping him down to 7th, were all a bit of bad luck and not really his fault. But in this race, we started to see the faintest outline of cracks appearing in this absolutely perfect season. It started in qualifying. Max is on his way to achieving the fastest lap. Halfway through, he gets a radio message from his team telling him to come into the pits because he doesn't have enough fuel to complete the lap. Normally, in a dry race, in the final part of qualifying, drivers will do just one push lap at top speed. They'll come back into the pits, they'll refuel, and then they'll go out for a second run. But because it was raining in Singapore, drivers were staying out for 2 or 3 or 4 laps. Now, you have to be fueled for the entire time. And where it gets complex is as the track dries, speeds increase. And as speeds increase, the fuel consumption increases. So teams not only have to fuel for the amount of laps available, but they have to predict how fast the cars will be going in 3 or 4 laps' time. They run on such fine margins. No one wants to take extra fuel because that adds weight and that just increases your lap time. In this case, Red Bull pushed those margins a little bit too far and came out on the wrong side. Max was pissed. He was so upset with the team, calling them out for the mistake during the press conference after the session, and he left the track straight after that. He'll start the race from 8th position. Now, Max has won races from further back in the grid this year already, but Singapore is a bit different. This is a very hard track to overtake. And Max's reaction to the setback was uncharacteristic to how he's dealt with many other setbacks throughout the course of the year. He was very upset, very frustrated. I don't know if this frustration spilled over to the start of the race and caused him to have a bad start. But he fell back at the start, tangled with Magnussen, and had a lot of work to do to get back into the points. He carved his way through the field, getting up to 5th place, before trying a very ambitious overtake on Lando Norris. He runs deep at turn 7, and when he rejoins, he's outside the points, having to fight his way back through the field. He ends up in 7th, which, in context, is actually quite a good result. It's the frustrations and the way that he reacts to the team that was a bit surprising. This uncharacteristic mistake by the Red Bull team led to a lot of frustrations for Max, and that in turn led to some unforced errors, which in this race he wasn't able to recover from, showing that he's probably human after all. Thank you for watching my review of the Singapore Grand Prix. I hope you've enjoyed it. It was a really fun race to cover. There are a few potential big stories developing this week. We're expecting some driver announcements. Firstly, one of the worst kept secrets in the paddock, Nick de Vries to be announced as a driver for AlphaTauri, partner Yuki Tsunoda. This will free up Pierre Gasly to move to Alpine, having an all-French team with Esteban Ocon. Then there's a potentially explosive story brewing about the 2021 budget cap. I know, accounting, explosive, who would have thought it? It was leaked in Singapore that 2 teams have overspent on the budget cap. Each team is limited to spend $145 million per year. It's possible that Red Bull could be one of those teams, even though Christian Horner strongly denies this. The next race is in Japan. This gives Max another opportunity to clinch the title, this time in front of Honda's home fans. Until next time, goodbye.